Ted Bundy is arguably one of the most evil killers the world has ever produced. Between 1974 and 1978, he abducted, raped, and murdered at least 30 young women across 7 different American states. 2 of his victims were just 12 years old. Behind a handsome face, a sharp intellect, and a disarming charm, there existed a monster who killed purely because he enjoyed it. When a journalist once asked him point blank why he did it, Bundy raised one eyebrow, smiled, and said simply, "Because I liked it." At 2:45 inches the morning, a fugitive serial killer broke into the Chi Omega sorority house on the campus of Florida State University. Within 15 minutes, he had attacked 4 women, raping, beating, knocking out teeth, and biting the buttock of one of his victims with such force that the impression of his teeth would later be used as evidence against him in court. The attack was not the work of a man losing control. It was the work of a man who had spent years perfecting violence and who had escaped justice so many times that he believed he was untouchable. Some of his victims lived to describe their encounters. One survivor recalled how he leaned close to her face, so close she thought he was going to kiss her, before whispering into her ear, "You know what? I'm going to kill you." He then wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed. At the time of his arrest, investigators suspected he may have murdered close to 100 young women. Sentenced to death for his crimes, Ted Bundy left behind a legacy of terror that has never quite faded. Bundy began his killing campaign in the Pacific Northwest and spread it methodically across the country. He would eventually confess to the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 30 young women between 1974 and 1978, though the true number is believed to be far higher. Those who studied him described the nature of his violence as deliberate and extreme. He broke bones, tore away parts of the body, mutilated victims before and after their deaths, and by his own admission, returned to the bodies of his victims long after killing them. He was not a man driven by impulse. He was a man driven by the deep, calculated pleasure of causing suffering. Rhonda Stapley was a pharmacy student at the University of Utah in 1974. She survived a vicious attack by Bundy and was so traumatized by the experience that she kept her ordeal secret for more than 30 years. Nobody went out at night, she later recalled. Nobody walked to the library alone. There was terror and fear among women everywhere. When Bundy was finally caught in 1978 and transferred to the Leon County Jail in Florida, the sheriff tasked with keeping him imprisoned, Ken Katsaris, described the strange experience of guarding him. "He was evil," Katsaris said, "but you could not discern that even if you knew. He came across as brilliant, charismatic, and smart. Put all of those qualities together with the evil inside him, and you have a very dangerous person indeed." Theodore Robert Bundy was born on the 24th of November 1946 at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. In 1940s America, the ideal of the nuclear family, the married couple, the stable home, the respectable address was not merely a social preference. It was the standard by which people were judged. Those who fell outside it were stigmatized, sometimes cruelly. To protect her son and herself from that judgment, Bundy's 22-year-old mother, Eleanor, returned to her parents' home in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There, her parents raised young Ted as their own child, presenting themselves to the world as his parents, and Eleanor as his older sister. Ted lived with this lie for nearly 4 years. His grandfather was described as a violent and domineering figure, which suggests that from his very earliest years, Bundy grew up in an atmosphere of fear and instability rather than safety. Just before his 4th birthday, Eleanor moved to Tacoma, Washington, where she met and married a man named Johnny Bundy. The couple formally adopted Ted when he was 5 and went on to have 4 children together, but Ted never truly bonded with the family. He remained on its edges, slightly apart, increasingly aware of the gap between the life he had and the life he wanted. He was acutely conscious of the family's modest financial circumstances and felt a deep, persistent shame about it, a shame that would calcify over the years into resentment. A gifted student, Bundy enrolled at the University of Washington in 1966. At 20 years old, he fell deeply in love with a woman named Stephanie, the kind of woman he had always wanted. poised, beautiful, and from a prosperous family. He was devoted to her completely. But after a period of intense romance, she ended the relationship, citing among her reasons that he lacked ambition. For a man already riddled with class anxiety and feelings of inadequacy, the rejection was devastating. It fed the growing bitterness inside him. Bundy dropped out of university in 1968. The following year, on a trip back to the East Coast, ostensibly to research his roots, he uncovered the family secret that had been kept from him his entire life. The woman he had always been told was his sister was in fact his mother. His birth certificate listed him as illegitimate. In a single discovery, the two most important women in his life, his real mother and his mother figure, had both deceived and abandoned him in their own ways. And not long before, the woman he had hoped to marry had rejected him too. From that point forward, according to those who later studied him, Bundy viewed women as fundamentally untrustworthy. He returned to the University of Washington and enrolled in psychology. He began dating Elizabeth, a single mother, though the relationship was exploitative at its core. Women, for Bundy, served a function. They provided shelter, meals, companionship, and social access. He latched on to people, extracted what he wanted, and moved on. In 1971, he took a part-time job at a Seattle suicide hotline, projecting the image of a caring, civic-minded young man. After graduating, he joined a Republican governor's re-election campaign. In September 1973, he was accepted into law school at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma. Before the law course began, he traveled to California and reconnected with Stephanie while still seeing Elizabeth. Now he was a law student, a political operative, a man on the rise. He was finally, seemingly, the man she had wanted him to be. They became engaged. And then, with cold and calculated precision, Bundy dropped her. He had engineered the entire rekindled romance not out of genuine feeling, but out of a need for narcissistic revenge. Having taken back control by rejecting the woman who had once rejected him, he returned to Washington with a simmering fury toward womankind and decided it was time to act on it. In the early hours of January 4, 1974, Bundy broke into the basement apartment of an 18-year-old dancer and university student while she slept. He beat her savagely with a metal rod and sexually assaulted her with it. She was left unconscious, with severe brain injuries and lasting internal damage that permanently altered her life. For years, many assumed this attack had come from nowhere, a sudden eruption of violence from a man who had shown no warning signs. In reality, there had been plenty of warning signs, but they had been invisible to the world. Bundy had for some time been a voyeur, creeping up to women's windows at night to watch them undress. The voyeurism had not been enough. He escalated. In February 1974, Bundy struck again, and this time he killed. His victim was a 21-year-old University of Washington student named Linda. He broke into her room and attacked her with such violence that she did not survive. Afterward, he drove her body to a remote beauty spot in Taylor Mountain Forest, about 30 minutes from campus, where he would later deposit the remains of other victims. He needed to know where they were. He needed to maintain control over them, even in death. Linda's body was found more than a year later, in 1975. After Linda's murder, Bundy quit law school after just 6 months and returned to Washington as a full-time predator. His method was refined and deliberate. He would approach young women in public places, often wearing a fake arm, sling, or pretending to need help with something, projecting helplessness to disarm his targets. He was clean-cut and charming, and looked nothing like anyone's idea of a killer. His tan Volkswagen Beetle became his instrument of abduction, carrying victims to remote locations where the attack would begin. 8 young women were murdered in the first half of 1974 alone, more than one a month. Fear spread across the Pacific Northwest like a slow, creeping fog. That summer, Bundy changed his approach entirely. On July 14, at Lake Sammamish State Park, in broad daylight and in full view of hundreds of beachgoers, he abducted 2 women, 23-year-old Janice and 19-year-old Denise, within hours of each other. Several witnesses noticed a common thread: a good-looking young man in his 20s, calling himself Ted, driving a tan VW Beetle. A police composite sketch was broadcast nationally. It was seen by Elizabeth, Bundy's long-term girlfriend, who called the authorities and gave them his name, his description, and the details of his car. The tip was dismissed. He was, after all, a clean-cut law student. In September 1974, Bundy relocated to Salt Lake City, having been accepted into law school at the University of Utah. He presented himself as an ordinary student. Beneath that surface, he was already hunting. Rhonda Stapley was waiting at a bus stop one afternoon after a dental appointment when Bundy pulled his Beetle up alongside her. He was nicely dressed and told her he was a law student. She accepted a ride. After a couple of blocks, he took a turn away from the university. "I hope you don't mind," he said pleasantly, "but I have a short errand to run." She did mind, but before she could object, they were already heading into the canyon. He stopped talking. He kept both hands on the wheel and drove. She watched him scanning the roadside, slowing at corners. She understood, too late, what he was looking for. He pulled into a deserted picnic area and parked. He turned to face her and leaned in very close. She thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, he said, "You know what? I'm going to kill you." He put his hands around her throat and began to squeeze. She lost consciousness. When she came around, she was on the picnic table with Bundy sitting on her chest. He held his hand over her nose and mouth until she blacked out, then brought her back, then cut off her air again. He liked watching her fade in and out. Then, during a single moment when his back was turned and he was searching for something in the rear of the car, she jumped up and ran into the darkness. She fell into a fast-running mountain stream and was swept away through the rocks. Eventually, she pulled herself out and walked home. She told no one for more than 30 years. "I felt embarrassed, stupid, and ashamed," she later explained, "and I was a religious girl." The teachings at the time were that if you had a choice between losing your life or losing your virtue, it was better for you eternally to lose your life. So I decided the best thing was to suck it up, pretend it never happened, and go on. Rhonda's escape did not slow Bundy down. In November 1974, he approached an 18-year-old woman named Carol at a Utah shopping mall, posing as a police officer. She managed to escape when she opened the car door and fled. On November 8th, he abducted 17-year-old Deborah from outside a theater. She was never seen again. Throughout all of this, Bundy remained invisible to police. The tip from Elizabeth had gone nowhere. The composite sketch on television looked like half the young men in America. In 1975, Bundy killed 3 more women in Colorado, assaulted a 12-year-old girl in Idaho, and murdered a 15-year-old in Provo, Utah. His crimes were becoming less organized, more frantic. In August 1975, he was pulled over by a Utah Highway Patrol officer who found his VW Beetle suspicious. The front passenger seat had been removed, and the car contained an ice pick, a crowbar, and a ski mask. Bundy had an explanation for everything, but suspicion had been aroused. State detectives flew to Seattle, interviewed Elizabeth, and learned about strange items she had found in his apartment: a meat cleaver and a bag of women's clothing. Bundy sold his Beetle, but the car was recovered. Inside, investigators found strands of hair matching Carol and 2 other women. On the 2nd of October 1975, Bundy was arrested. Carol identified him in a lineup with certainty. Unable to charge him with murder at that stage, prosecutors tried him only for Carol's abduction. On the 30th of June 1976, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years. He was moved to a county jail in Colorado while investigators built a murder case against him. Then he escaped. Representing himself in a preliminary hearing, Bundy used his access to the jail's law library to jump out of a window. He was on the run for 6 days before being recaptured. A year later, he escaped again, this time by noticing a hole in his cell ceiling, squeezing through it, emerging in the chief jailer's apartment, and walking straight out the front door of the prison. He made his way to the quiet university town of Tallahassee, Florida. He was 31 years old, nationally wanted, and completely free. On the 15th of January 1978, at 2:45 inches the morning, Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house. In 15 minutes, he attacked 4 women. 21-year-old Margaret was beaten with a piece of firewood and strangled with her own stockings. 20-year-old Lisa was beaten, raped, and killed. 2 others were beaten so severely that their survival seemed unlikely, though both pulled through. Sheriff Ken Katsaris, who arrived at the scene shortly afterward, later described standing outside the sorority house and receiving a call that strange noises were coming from a condo 6 blocks away. Bundy had broken into another apartment and attacked a fifth woman before fleeing out the back window. A few weeks later, he struck again in Lake City, Florida. His victim this time was a 12-year-old girl. He dumped her body in Woodland about 30 miles from where he had taken her, then stole a car and drove west toward the Florida Panhandle. On the 15th of February 1978, a Pensacola police officer stopped a car he considered suspicious and ran the plates. The vehicle was stolen. After a brief struggle during which the officer was forced to fire a warning shot, America's most notorious serial killer was taken into custody for the last time. Bundy was transferred to the Leon County Jail, Tallahassee, where Sheriff Katsaris had his cell lined with welded sheets of armor-plated steel. Every fixture that could be removed had been reinforced. The locks on his door were operated by multiple people simultaneously. Bundy was not going anywhere. During his regular interactions with Bundy, Katsaris began to suspect something crucial. He believed that Bundy had left a deliberate signature on the body of one of his victims, a double bite mark on the left buttock of Lisa, the young woman killed in the sorority house. The evidence is there. Bundy would taunt him. You just can't find it. When Katsaris confronted him about his motivations, about his mother, about his illegitimate birth, and the lies he had been told about his identity, Bundy's composure cracked. He grabbed a welded shower rod and ripped it from the wall. Katsaris needed a bite impression from Bundy's mouth to compare against the marks on Lisa's body. His team tried offering him different fruits to bite into. Bundy grew suspicious and stopped eating his fruit. So Katsaris obtained a search warrant for Bundy's mouth. He personally escorted Bundy, fitted with a specially engineered leg brace that would lock stiff if he tried to run to a dentist's office. When the door opened to reveal 3 men in white coats and a dental chair behind them, Bundy understood immediately what was happening. He sat down in the chair, smiled, and said, "Ken, you know I'm not a violent person. Do what you need to do." The impression matched the bite marks on Lisa's body. It was the key piece of evidence that would convict him. Bundy's trial began in Miami on the 25th of June, 1979. It was the first nationally televised trial in American history. He represented himself, arriving in court well-dressed, smiling at the gallery, flirting with observers, performing the role of the wrongly accused charmer to the last. On the 24th of July, 1979, the jury convicted him on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to death twice over. A third death sentence followed for the murder of the 12-year-old girl in Lake City. In a courtroom moment that stunned observers, Bundy used his sentencing hearing to propose marriage to a woman named Carol, whom he had been dating in Seattle in 1974 and who had continued to profess his innocence. She accepted. She later claimed that their daughter, born in 1982, was Bundy's child. Bundy spent 10 years on death row, exhausting every legal avenue available to him. The total cost of his trials and appeals reached approximately $9 million. As the end approached, he began releasing confessions slowly and strategically, a name here, a location there, hoping to buy more time. A macabre media circus swelled around him. Radio stations played the sound of sizzling bacon to mock his impending electrocution. Crowds gathered outside the prison to celebrate. At 7:16 inches the morning, on the 24th of January, 1989, 42-year-old Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. He was still calling out victims' names as he was walked into the execution chamber, still trying, to the very end, to trade information for time. He died having confessed to 30 murders, with the true number almost certainly higher. What made Ted Bundy so uniquely terrifying was not merely the scale of his violence, but the absolute disconnect between how he appeared and what he was. He was educated, articulate, politically engaged, professionally ambitious, and physically attractive. He volunteered at a suicide hotline. He campaigned for a governor. He enrolled in law school twice. He looked, in every outward respect, like someone whose life was going places. And behind all of it, he was selecting women and girls to abduct, rape, and kill. and returning to their bodies afterward to enact further rituals of domination and control. The warning signs existed, but they were private. The voyeurism, the carefully nursed resentments, the exploitation of every relationship he had ever been in, the cold calculation with which he had reseduced and then abandoned Stephanie, not out of love, but as an act of revenge. These were the fault lines running beneath the surface of a man who looked perfectly normal and who worked very hard to keep looking that way. Bundy chose his victims deliberately. He did not prey on the vulnerable in the conventional sense. He targeted young women who were educated, often beautiful, frequently from more privileged backgrounds than his own. The jealousy and shame he had carried since childhood about his birth, his class, his identity, expressed itself as contempt and rage toward exactly the kind of woman he had always wanted to be accepted by. He killed women who reminded him of Stephanie. He killed women who represented everything he felt he deserved but had been denied. Sheriff Ken Katsaris, who spent 2 years guarding Bundy and came to know him better than almost anyone outside the academic community studying him, put it plainly. "I don't often agree with the death penalty," he said after the execution, "but with him, it was necessary. So many people were taken in by him, despite the trail of bodies he left behind. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the man next door." Ted Bundy used his intelligence, his looks, and his charm to abduct, rape, and murder by some estimates close to 100 young women and girls. He was never fully known, never fully understood, and never fully exhausted as a subject of morbid fascination for a public that could not quite believe someone so seemingly ordinary could be responsible for such extraordinary evil. That gap between what he appeared to be and what he actually was is precisely what made him one of the most dangerous human beings who ever lived. And possibly, without exaggeration, one of the most evil killers the world has ever known.